people get these blood tests, what you said, I think you said normal labs, right? Kind of standard, what the doc typically recommends if you're going to a regular MD, and they've got a set of symptoms and everything looks fine. Well, let's first off talk about what does that even mean, that the blood tests look fine? We have normal ranges, reference ranges, things like that. Talk to us about how you feel about that.
If we look at insulin, and specifically fasting insulin, the standard lab range goes up to 26. The functional range is actually 2 to 6. So think about how much lower that is than going up to 26.
Hold on. What do you mean by functional range? I want to make sure people understand that.
So functional range is going to be our optimized ranges.
All right.
So a lot of the standard ranges on blood work, you're already in the disease state at that point.
Yeah. Welcome to Vitality Radio, the podcast that helps you make sense of natural supplements and thrive without pharma drugs. I'm Jared St. Clair. I grew up in a health food store and spent over 40 years now figuring out what works and what doesn't, so that you can make confident, informed decisions about nutrition, supplements, and your health. Hello and welcome to Vitality Radio, the podcast that helps you master natural supplements, enhance your emotional vitality, and thrive without the use of pharma drugs. I'm your host, Jared St. Clair, and today I've got a special treat for you, but also for me, because first off, my guest is a local, and he's a local that I just made acquaintance with just about a month ago at the Be Healthy Utah show. We met, maybe it's been a month and a half now, something like that. And we've already become friends. I've spent a decent amount of time in his shop here in Utah County. For those of you who are local, Highland, I believe, is the actual city. Have I got that right, Shea?
Yeah, Highland, right on the border.
It is Highland. Okay. I always get confused out there. Lehigh, Highland, Alpine, there's a bunch of them right tied in together. But anyway, I'll introduce Shea in just a minute, but I want to give a backstory before I do that. So I am a non-practitioner, as most people know that listen to this show. I'm a guy who was a kid raised in a health food store. I certainly feel like I've earned a little bit of the knowledge that I've gained through doing that for sure, for all of these years. And I know supplements really well, but I don't have any classical training, I guess, if you want to say that, or, schooling specific to what a lot of functional medicine practitioners would have. I've never been trained how to read blood tests, for instance. I don't do blood tests. I don't do hair analysis. I don't do those types of things. I do a lot of nutritional counseling. I do a lot of supplement recommending, that sort of thing. And I do have people that will present to me their blood work and say, hey, what do you think of this? And so I've had to become at least familiar with these things. But as I was talking to my guest, Shea, just about a month ago, and he was going over a few things that he looks for in blood tests, I became very quickly fascinated with some of what he was telling me. In fact, we've gone back and forth. I've sent him some Instagram reels from other practitioners that are have big names in this this space, and gotten his opinion on things. And I've learned a lot already. So I invited him to come on and talk to us about blood tests, hair analysis, a few other types of testing that he does, and get a little bit more into, I'll say, into the weeds, but in a way that I think you're going to really understand, and in a way that if you've got blood tests sitting around your house there that you've had done, that you can maybe go back and look at it with a better view of what you may be actually looking at in terms of, what does this mean when I'm looking at my ALT level, for instance, things like that. So that's what we're going to dig into today. I'll tell you a little bit about Shea, and then we'll bring him on the show here officially. After spending a decade as an over-the-road truck driver, Shea experienced firsthand how lifestyle and nutrition impact every aspect of health. That journey sparked a deep passion for understanding the body's unique needs. And today, as a functional nutritional therapy practitioner and blood chemistry specialist, he opened Shea's Health and Nutrition, a walk-in supplement store where anyone can get expert guidance. Shea and his team help people understand the root cause of their health issues through symptom analysis and, if needed, clinical testing. Shea, I'm really excited to have you on the show today. Thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Jared. It was great to finally meet you. I'd been told time and time again to get in touch with you. So it was really, really good seeing it Be Healthy Utah and finally getting to know you now.
Yeah, we share. We're for people not familiar with the area. I'm about 45 minutes ish from your place here in Bountiful. There's basically Salt Lake City is in between us, and it's funny because you've got all this, and we'll talk a little bit about your experience with testing and things like that. But you're a very new to the ownership anyway of a supplement store, just having opened last October, and of course our store's been around for 49 years this August. So there's a very big difference as far as that goes. But what I think is really cool about what you're doing and super unique is you've got a supplement based business that is very much looking at, people's actual lab results, which I don't see a whole lot, at least not in the way that you do it. In fact, I've never seen it in the way that you do it. And so when we met and, we share a lot of reps from some of our, some of the same supplement companies and things like that. And they told me the same thing. Hey, you got to go talk to Shea. You got to get your supplements in there and get to know him. He's a great guy and he's doing some really good stuff. And I was like, okay. So when I saw you at Be Healthy Utah, we approached and it's been a cool relationship so far. So tell me this, to give people a little bit more of the background beyond what we read in your bio. You opened up your store in October, but you have had some experience prior to that. How did you actually decide to get into this side of the world, this supplement business?
Yeah, I was working one-on-one with people already. Doing that, we were doing a lot of testing, but people had to pay for a package, and that was pricing a lot of people out. And in the 3 years of doing that, I came to understand people mostly want the testing and they want the supplements. So my background is looking for nutritional deficiencies and how those manifest through symptoms in the body. Symptoms are the body's way of telling us something's wrong. That's why it always drives me crazy when people go get normal blood work. They know something's wrong, but the blood work's not showing anything. And then everybody just dismisses their symptoms.
Yeah. And well, it's kind of crazy too, because, my wife and I went up to the Cellcore practitioner conference. We are actually considered Cellcore practitioners and talk a lot about their formulas on our show and things like that. And the cool thing about this particular conference that they do up in Boise each year is it's a bunch of like really highly experienced practitioners in the functional medicine space. And some are very focused on hormones and others are very focused on parasites and, kind of across the board. But one thing that was said that I thought was really, really beautiful, and it resonated in a different way for both me and my wife when we heard it, even though it's always been something that I've definitely felt, I didn't articulate it as well as this particular speaker did. And what she said that I thought was so important that people need to understand, and it comes right off the heels of what you were saying about symptomology, is that your body is not broken. Your body is experiencing symptoms because it's actually trying to help you figure something out, essentially, right? It's working for you, not against you, even though there might be pain or inflammation or, issues with your, with one of your glands or organs or whatever. The body is always in kind of protect mode and heal mode and trying to find homeostasis. It just needs the proper tools to get there. And so symptoms are a fantastic way to at least know there's something wrong. But what we don't want to do, Shea, and I know you and I agree on this, is just chase symptoms all the time, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad you said inflammation right there, because that was the first thing that came to my head. The body has to inflame. It has to inflame first to heal. The problem is if we're not giving it the cofactors it needs to finish off the healing part, it's going to stay inflamed. And I think that's one of the places where modern medicine really gets it wrong. A lot of the times they're just going to turn off that inflammation response. So we don't feel that anymore. They're not actually going to heal anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is, modern medicine, I call it suppressive medicine. It's just pushing symptoms down. It's medical whack-a-mole to a large degree, right? We're just smacking these moles and more of them are popping up, and those moles actually happen to be symptoms. I was talking to a gentleman just the other day. We've got our new location up in South Ogden, and I was talking to him and he came in, he didn't know me. In fact, he came in expecting to meet the woman who, previously owned the store, who has a real great reputation for, helping her customers. And he started with a list. And his list was 3 herbs. And he wanted hibiscus, and he wanted hawthorn, and he wanted cayenne. And Shea, you can imagine what he's concerned about with those 3 herbs, right?
Yeah,
and so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
was going after some heart stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So he said, yeah, I think he said it was a sister, if I remember right. I might be wrong. I can't remember who recommended these things, but someone who was, trying to help him with his health. And I said, okay, so we're talking about cardiovascular health here. So what's going on? And then he talked about he wants to not be on blood pressure medication and he doesn't want to be on cholesterol medication, but he struggles in both of those departments. And so then we had to have a conversation about cholesterol, which is always different for people the first time they hear it. And then we talked about blood pressure and we talked about, the different avenues. But what I thought was really interesting is here's a guy. Oh, and then it stumbled into him also being on a proton pump inhibitor. He didn't think he could get off of that. And I said, oh, no. You can definitely get your gut to the point where it doesn't need, that type of support. But when you think about these things, all three of the drugs that he was talking about, they are all suppressing type drugs, right? PPIs are suppressing stomach acid production and blood pressure medicines are suppressing blood pressure, but not by regulating or normalizing what the cardiovascular system is doing or the heart is doing, but by basically forcing the action by either beta blocking or calcium channel blocking or diuretic or whatever it is, depending on the pharmaceutical that you're on. And then cholesterol drugs are pushing cholesterol down and hey, statins work great for that. The question is, do they actually improve your heart health? And based on every answer I've ever seen that is actually clinically proven, I'm not convinced. So symptom chasing gets us into a lot of trouble. But I feel like the thing you said right at the beginning is so important. And that is that people get these blood tests, what you said, I think you said normal labs, right? Kind of standard what the doc typically recommends if you're going to a regular MD. And they've got a set of symptoms and everything looks fine. Well, let's first off talk about what does that even mean, that the blood tests look fine? We have normal ranges, reference ranges, things like that. Talk to us about how you feel about that.
Yeah, and I think one of the TikToks he sent me the other day brought up one of the most important ones. If we look at insulin, and specifically fasting insulin, people will mess this up. They're going for blood work and not be fasted. That blood work is almost useless at that point. But fasting insulin, the standard lab range goes up to 26. The functional range is actually 2 to 6. So think about how much lower that is than going up to 26.
Hold on. What do you mean by functional range? I want to make sure people understand that.
So functional range is going to be our optimized ranges.
All right.
So a lot of the standard ranges on blood work, you're already in the disease state at that point.
Yeah. Well, let's take, you said insulin, but A1C is an interesting marker too, right? That's paid very close attention to. And I think it's something that we should pay attention to. A1C, in most cases, my experience, just hearing from people who have had blood work done, is that unless they're in the quote unquote borderline, 5.4, 5, 6, somewhere in there typically is the number that a doctor will tend to say is borderline, then they're not even talking about it in most cases. And everything is, again, quote unquote, fine. But that insulin thing, I want to chase that one down a little bit because I think that's one that, you just gave a really big number. I talk about testosterone when I'm trying to make this point because, the reference range is usually like 300 to 800. And that's this huge range of 500 points, right? 300 to 0 is a smaller range. But talk about the insulin because you said 2 to 6 is functional.
Yes.
But we're not concerned unless it's above 26.
Yeah, it's not going to be a flag in a lab unless it's above 26. And I actually have a really good example of this last night. I was going over somebody's blood work. I can look at it right now. So A1C was 5.7, but fasting glucose was down at 91. Pretty much every doctor is going to just brush that off. One of the most important things there, if we get fasting glucose and fasting insulin, we can actually do some math. What this can be called is HOMA-IR. So we're actually measuring how insulin resistant somebody is, even if they have that normal-ish glucose and A1C range. It's actually pretty easy to do. The only problem is a lot of the times insulin doesn't get run on standard blood work. But if you have it, we're going to take your fasting insulin, times it by your fasting glucose, and then divide that by 405.
And what does that tell us?
So like this, we're going to give an example here. If we have a glucose at 91, insulin at 10.2, and then divide that by the 405, that gives an insulin resistance score of 2.29. We want to keep that under 1.
Okay.
I also have another calculator that can do the math to see how hard those beta cells are working to keep that glucose there.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So then you're looking at, again, you said on a normal lab, most times we're going to see A1C and we're going to see glucose, right? And assuming that it's fasted and all that stuff, we should have a relatively accurate number there. But we're not typically seeing insulin because that's not usually in a standard test. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's usually not run, especially on like your annual physical. It's not going to be run there. You have to ask for it, and then of course you go with the doctors and see if they'll actually do it or not.
Yeah, talk to us about that because there's this thing in America called the standard of care. And, I've talked about it a lot specific to prescribing, so if your cholesterol's above 199, the standard of care is to recommend a statin or prescribe a statin, that kind of thing. But when it comes to blood tests, there's also and I don't know if it's a written or an unwritten standard, but why does a doctor run a specific test when there's these numbers like insulin or reverse T3 is one that doesn't typically get run, when we're looking at thyroid, but that a lot of functional medicine doctors look at, but most regular doctors don't. Why is that? How does that work?
It's going to be all insurance stuff. If it's not deemed absolutely necessary, a lot of times it's not going to get covered by insurance. So doctors aren't even going to give you the option for it.
So then if you ask your doctor for it, what happens? You said it's kind of a crapshoot.
It's going to be that you could end up paying for it just out of pocket. But the good thing is, if you can come to places like this, we can run pretty in-depth blood work for $220. And we're going to get all these things on there, especially when you're looking at full thyroid panels. The liver markers, we're going to put GGT on there because that's actually one of the best markers for early issues going on, especially with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Interesting. Okay. So then let's talk about the insurance thing's important too. I'm going a lot of different directions, Shea. I apologize, but the insurance thing is very interesting. We have this, I think there are a few things that we've kind of been trained on in America when it comes to medicine. We've been trained that the guy or the gal in the white coat is the authority on our health. We've been trained that if it's not covered by insurance, that maybe we shouldn't pay for it because we pay a lot of money for insurance, right? Those of us who carry health insurance. And we're looking at these things and saying, well, my gosh, I'm already paying $700, $800, $900, whatever it is a month for insurance. The last thing I want to do is pay another $220 for a blood test, right? Especially when I can get it for free. But the question is, what are you getting for free? Is your doctor willing to actually kind of bend or flex for you to give you what you're actually looking for? And I would dare say that your doctor is not different than your car mechanic. If they're not giving you what you're paying for or what you're looking for, you probably should be shopping for someone who's capable or willing to do that. But it's interesting because you and so many other functional medicine practitioners are cash pay basis, or sometimes they call it concierge. You go in, your insurance ain't covering it, but you get what you want. And in many cases, much more depth than you're going to get on any kind of an insurance type clinic.
Yeah. And I think that's why you're starting to see like Function Health pop up and companies like that. And then people are shelling out $500 for those tests. And then it's not a bad thing because they actually can get really in-depth panels, and then it's not too much after that when they want to keep going.
Right.
So I think they get like 2 draws a year with it. But then, so yeah, it's what you're going to see. You're going to see a lot of those cash-only places pop up. A lot of nurse practitioners are going to be moving over towards that. It's just trying to get these markers that we need to see to get a full picture. If it's not a necessity for a disease, it's going to be really hard to get your standard doctor to run it. Copper is another just great example.
How many people in this audience have any idea what their copper level is, right?
Yeah. And trying to get a doctor to run ceruloplasmin and copper is impossible.
Yeah. All right. So then first off, I'm going to stop right now and say that if you are in Utah and if you're in reach of Highland, Utah, you really should consider, and this is an interesting thing because Shea and I technically could be competitors. I sell supplements. He sells supplements. Heck, we sell a lot of the same supplements. But the reason I've got Shea on is because I've learned that he knows his stuff. And he certainly, when it comes to blood work, knows it a heck of a lot better than I do. And he's also very well versed in supplementation and what supplements make sense in the case of a specific blood test result, which is what we're going to get into next. So if you're out there thinking, you know what, I get my labs once a year or whatever, I've still got symptoms. Doctor says nothing's wrong. We hear this all the time at Vitality. I know you do too, Shea. Then Shea is a really great resource for you for someone who is going to do it at a very reasonable price and then also be able to help you interpret what the heck the results actually means. And let's kind of prove that now. Let's go
Yeah.
through some of these things. We'll stick with blood right now, but you also do hair analysis and some things like that we can talk about as well. So with deficiencies, there are what you referred in an email to me as kind of some hidden deficiencies that people maybe wouldn't notice based on blood test results. Things like ALP and zinc, GGT and magnesium, that kind of thing. Let's talk about some of those.
Yeah. So that's what I love alkaline phosphatase, since ALP, people see it on their blood work. Doctors only worry about it when it's high. If we see that go under 60 and for sure under 50, that's a zinc deficiency, because that enzyme is completely zinc dependent. So we can safely assume if it's not there, we don't have enough zinc to make it. And the same goes with GGT and magnesium.
Let's go backwards real quick on that first one on ALP. First off, what is ALP itself? We don't need to get super technical, but what's it considered?
So that's an enzyme, and it's usually a metabolic reaction. The one we using it for the most, and when it gets high, is it can show tissue destruction. And that's why we learn when it gets high.
And that's why the doctor's concerned when it's high. But you're saying that on the other end of things, you can show a deficiency with it, with zinc. So why does that matter?
It's one of those normal metabolic byproducts that we're always using. And so it needs to be in a functional range.
Just generally for optimal health.
Yeah, because your tissue is constantly breaking down and repairing.
All right.
So I want to make sure that's actually happening.
Okay, so let's talk about GGT.
The GGT, and it's a tough one to go over. So that is a marker. And again, we're going to use it if it gets high. That's going to be one of the best markers for looking for early signs of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or just any kind of liver disease. But if it's low, especially if it gets below 10, we want to start looking at magnesium. And
magnesium is a deficiency?
Yes.
Okay. So why would that show? Because in a regular blood test, this is one thing I've talked about on Vitality Radio, and you and I talked about it briefly before we started recording. A regular blood test is basically never going to show magnesium deficiency, right? Because the body self-regulates the amount of magnesium in the blood. Is that accurate?
Well, and that's actually, so I'm waiting for 3 labs to come back right now that I had done last week, and they're all waiting for magnesium, but it's magnesium red blood cell.
Yeah, RBC.
Yep. So magnesium all the time gets run in serum, but that doesn't work because magnesium should be inside the blood cell. Magnesium and potassium should be inside the cell. Calcium and sodium are outside.
Okay. So then you're never really, from a standard blood test, you're never going to know if you have a magnesium deficiency. But on this show, I talk about magnesium deficiency as like one of the most prevalent deficiencies in America. And magnesium is like right at the top of my list of things everybody should probably consider taking, even if they don't have a blood test that shows the need. Let me ask you this then. So again, we're looking at ranges and things like that. First off, GGT, you say on the low end would indicate a potential magnesium deficiency.
Yes.
But we can then, if you see that, then is that when you order the RBC to verify that?
So in my standard panel, it's always on there.
The RBC is?
Yeah, the magnesium red blood cell. Okay. I just want to see it. It's going to be one of the best markers, and it's rare that I see somebody actually be good on magnesium.
All right. Yeah, it's pretty. Now, well, let me ask you this then. Magnesium, I think now, if I understand correctly, I might be wrong on this, but I think it's like the second or third best-selling supplement in America after multivitamins, omega-3s, and I'm thinking vitamin D, and then I think magnesium after that. And I'm talking like not health food stores, but just across the whole country in grocery stores and everything else. You clearly have a bunch of people coming into your place that are already supplementing magnesium. Do you see people that are still low even when they're supplementing it, or not so much?
Yeah, even when they're supplementing it, they're still can be low. We need B6 to keep it bioavailable.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be other deficiency that can be causing that. The other things that be causing it, if we have underactive adrenal issues going on, that's going to lead to the storage of magnesium in soft tissues and make it unbioavailable there as well. So
it's in the body, but it's not where it's supposed to be.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
That happens with calcium all the time, but it also can happen with magnesium.
But what you're telling us here that I think is really useful is if somebody listening to the show has a regular blood test from their regular doc that does not have the magnesium RBC on it, but it does have GGT, and they see that number low, then that is at least a pretty strong indicator that magnesium deficiency is an issue. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right. And so give us another example of this.
Yeah, so a super easy one that people always have on that standard blood work is we can figure out how our adrenals are doing by our sodium to potassium ratio. So you
Okay.
take your sodium, divide it by your potassium. That number should be between 31 and 34. After that, it's pretty self-explanatory. If it's under, it's underactive. If it's over, it's overactive. And a
Okay.
lot of the times we will try to confirm that here with a blood pressure test. This is another one that people can do at home completely by themselves if they have a blood pressure cuff.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to take their blood pressure while they're lying down. You can record that systolic number. That's the top number.
Mm-hmm.
Take it again immediately as you stand up. Your blood pressure should go up 10 points when you do that. If it either stays the same or worse drops, and that's going to be your POTS types,
Yeah.
we need some adrenal support.
Okay, excellent. So then these are some really interesting things that, again, generally speaking, people have these numbers, but they haven't been given any real education on what to do with them if they're not too high or way out of the normal range, that kind of thing, right?
And that one's always on there. We can go over another one that's always on there as well. If people know how to figure out their anion gap. So that one, we're going to take sodium, potassium, get that number, subtract your chloride and your CO2. That's going to tell you how acidic or alkaline your body is. So if it's high, you're acidic, it's low, you're alkaline. But we can use it to figure out if we have a B1 deficiency. Again, this is super common deficiency. We look at that. So we're going to see that high anion gap and low CO2. That points to B1 deficiency every time. That's going to have a lot of issues with glucose metabolism.
Yeah, B1. The more I learn about B1, the more I consider it just absolutely critical. And exactly what you said, way more commonly deficient than I ever thought it was up until just the last few years.
Well, I've been saying for years that B1 is the most important B vitamin.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I don't think I told you this, but the Eco Conference that I was at for Cellcore, not this year, but the year before, they had a speaker. His entire talk, 45 minutes, was all about B1 and B1 deficiency and how he thinks it is like it's the unspoken deficiency that everybody needs to know about. And I was already kind of digging into B1 at the time. In fact, around that same time, I had added 50 milligrams of benfotiamine to my multivitamin to go along with the thiamine that was in there already, specifically because I just kept reading and seeing all the benefits of B1 and how people are deficient and this kind of stuff. But he really sparked my interest. I started digging in deeper, and based on his talk, I increased my own personal consumption of B1 in the form of benfotiamine and have had good success with that. So that's one that I think people definitely need to know about. Now, you've mentioned zinc, you've mentioned magnesium, you've mentioned B1 so far. If you had to put a number on it, 100% of the time, 50% of the time, 20% of the time, whatever, of the clients that you see, how often do you see them with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different pretty obvious deficiencies when it comes to vitamins and minerals?
Getting the obvious ones sometimes is hard. We do see a ton of B1 deficiencies, a ton of zinc deficiencies. Those are the two we see a lot of.
And you mentioned copper before, and copper and zinc kind of play together. Do you see a lot of copper deficiency as well?
That's the interesting one because we also do hair analysis here.
Okay.
And most people are doing hair analysis are always worried about copper toxicity. We see a lot more copper deficiency. And that's going to be a lot of people taking 50 milligrams of zinc a day. That's going to deplete copper.
Right.
We need good stomach acid for both of those. So they're metals.
Yeah, so if you're on a PPI or you're doing a lot of antacids and things like that, you're going to have a heck of a time absorbing it, even if you are taking them, right?
Yep. And so copper and vitamin A deficiencies will absolutely wreak havoc with your iron stores.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I wanted to get into iron as well. So, but first, really quickly on this. So the copper and zinc thing, I was surprised that you see so many zinc deficiencies. And the only reason I was surprised by that is 6 years ago, you might not remember this, but we had this thing called COVID, right? And zinc became like the supplement along with quercetin during that time, right? Everybody wanted zinc and quercetin because the big influencers online were pushing zinc and quercetin. And what was not ever happening was they were never pushing zinc and quercetin and copper. It's copper to, help balance the zinc, right? So at that point, I actually developed a formula, specifically a vitamin C formula with copper and zinc in it, because I had so many people asking me for zinc, not asking for copper. And I knew I wanted them to have copper as well. But I think it's interesting that you still see a lot of zinc deficiencies because anybody taking a multivitamin is getting zinc. And oftentimes, I would say more often than not copper or not enough copper, depending on the quality of the multivitamin. And then lots of people are supplementing zinc just on its own. And I've noticed in my shop that we see a lot of people that just come in and buy zinc that I don't think bought zinc prior to COVID, but that became part of their kind of, regimen. And then we get to talk to them about, okay, so if you're going to take zinc, that's fine, but let's make sure we're also balancing it with copper. But do you see more zinc or more copper, or is it pretty equal as far as deficiencies?
It seems to be pretty equal. Zinc is a funny one. I don't know what percent of the population is on PPIs, but I'm guessing it's a pretty
Way
large
too many
right now because I just sell Ozempic at Costco like candy.
Meprazole.
Or Meprazole, yeah.
If they sold Ozempic at Costco, it'd be the number one selling product.
Any of those metals, we have to have good stomach acid to get. And we have to oxidize them for our body to be able to absorb them.
Right. Well, in my take, there's three problems with that. One is PPIs. The other one is Tums and Rolaids and all that kind of stuff, right? The things that people take when they get the heartburn. Yep. And then the other one is most of us are walking around with too low a stomach acid anyway once we hit 40, 50 years old, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So there's a lot of issues with mineral absorption. And then from a food standpoint, we aren't getting what we used to get because the soil is so depleted as well. So there's a wide range of reasons why minerals are a problem in terms of deficiency in this country.
One of our favorite tests to do is people that are already taking zinc would do what's called the zinc tally test. We do that completely for free here. So we do a really low dose of zinc in liquid form and have people hold that in their mouth, hold it in their mouth for 10 seconds and then swish it around for another 5. If you're good on zinc, you should get a very bitter metallic taste. And a lot of people taking zinc still don't taste anything because they're not actually absorbing it.
Well, there you go. I'm officially doing okay on zinc then, because every zinc lozenge I've ever had leaves me tasting metal for 30 minutes. So. Yep. I didn't know that though. That's very interesting. I hadn't heard that before. Okay, let's talk about then. Let's jump into iron, because I don't know if there's a mineral that we talk about in nutrition that is more maybe confusing and also pretty heavily debated in terms of iron. There's a lot of people out there pushing iron supplements. There's a lot of people saying, whoa, wait a minute. There's a bunch of cofactors we need to be concerned about before we're worried about iron. Where do you come out on this?
Yeah, iron drives me absolutely nuts. And sometimes it has to be supplemented. But two of the things we're going to watch out for immediately is gallbladder types, because I want to see what vitamin A is doing. And then people who have any kind of digestive issues going on. If we have bacterial overgrowth and we're getting bloated with all these meals, I think iron's going to pour gasoline on the fire for that.
Sure.
Iron
so then, the first thing you said, though, I didn't quite understand it before the stomach issues.
Yeah. So that's why we see a lot of people that have no gallbladder, they're anemic a lot of the time.
Okay. Because they don't have a gallbladder in the first place, or under functioning maybe in some cases as well.
Yeah. Because it's going to be super easy for them to get a vitamin A deficiency. If we don't have enough vitamin A in the blood, there's a thing called hepcidin that's going to be in the blood, and it's going to get elevated to inappropriate levels. Iron's going to stay in the spleen and in the liver. And that's where we run into issues. If we don't have that free-flowing iron around the body, then we're never going to get ferritin to come up, because how are we going to store more iron if it's not floating around in the body?
Okay, so then the gallbladder issue is a problem because vitamin A is a fat-soluble vitamin. So then we're not breaking it down and absorbing it like we normally would. So let's first, before we get into the rest of that, because I still want to dive into vitamin A a little bit, but I think there's going to be a lot of questions about the iron levels that are looked at, or the way iron levels are looked at, I guess, in blood, because you mentioned ferritin, but there's also serum iron, right? What are the things that you're looking at in blood to determine if there's an iron issue, I guess?
Yeah, so if we have low ferritin, low iron saturation, then we might have actually true iron deficiency. Still want to see what vitamin A is doing there. But some other patterns we can look at. Let's say somebody has good ferritin levels, but low serum iron, low iron saturation. That's a copper issue. That iron is stored in ferritin, but we need ceruloplasmin, which is copper dependent, to move it around and get it into the cells, get it into the hemoglobin.
So is your take that most people are probably not deficient, but they're not optimizing how their body is utilizing iron? Is that a good way to put it?
Iron's, it's got to be one of the most abundant minerals on the planet, right? It's in everything. It should be easy to get.
It's the third most abundant mineral, like literally in the makeup of the planet itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then,
we got to make sure our body is transporting it.
All right. So the big issues would be digestive issues that would prevent the body from absorbing iron. The same as what we said about zinc and copper. That would be a factor, right?
Yeah. So we look at iron in nature is in ferric form.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we need that stomach acid to oxidize it. So it goes to ferrous. And that's why supplements are usually in the ferroshell, which is a ferrous form.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not getting into that ferrous form, we're never going to absorb it through food.
Okay. All right. And so then what do you recommend? Well, let's talk about kind of, I know there isn't such a thing as typical, but maybe the most common thing you see with these three numbers that we're talking about with iron in the blood. What is pretty typical out there?
We end up seeing a lot more low iron levels with good ferritin levels. And so that's going to be our copper sign every time. We also want to see what the red blood cells are doing. We can use the number MCV on there, which is kind of telling us the size of our red blood cells. If they're getting too big, that's going to be a B9, B12 problem. If they're too small, which is going to be that microcytic anemia, that's your B6, zinc, copper, vitamin A.
Okay. All right. Very interesting. Okay. So then, but your take generally is that you're far more likely to have one of these other issues that's leading to an iron, I'm going to call it an iron imbalance, I guess, instead of an iron deficiency, than you are to actually be low in iron. Is that?
Yeah. I mean, we see that every time too. These people sit there and take iron supplements over and over again and nothing happens.
Right.
What's kind of the definition of insanity? Why are we doing that?
All right. So have you ever written a book on this? Because I think people would love that. This is really interesting stuff for sure.
That's what I'd have to have somebody else write it for me. I can barely spell myself. So.
Well, you clearly have learned a lot about this stuff. This is really, really interesting. On my notes, in terms of other things I wanted to talk about, one thing that I barely touched on it a little bit is thyroid, but thyroid is another one I think is super confusing to people. So let's talk about that one.
Yeah, thyroid, at the time, we'll see a lot of people come to us with only TSH or TSH and T4. Only TSH tells us nothing. That's coming from the pituitary as a signal down to the thyroid. So that can be out of whack, but it doesn't tell us anything if T4 and T3 are in range. That they're going to use that as the early sign of hypothyroidism. Could be an iodine deficiency. If we're having high TSH, the pituitary is having to send that signal to make T4, but we don't have the building blocks, which is just tyrosine and iodine. That's what T4 is. It's tyrosine with 4 iodine molecules attached to it. Iron does play a role there too, because the TPO comes before that, and that's actually the catalyst to get those iodine molecules attached. And that is heme dependent.
All right. So then this is another one that I think it's interesting. There's a lot of literature out there on this, that there may be, 20 million Americans, I think it was the last number I read, that are walking around with low thyroid that don't realize it because their basic blood tests aren't necessarily showing it, or they're just not getting blood tests at all. But this TSH thing frustrates the heck out of me because it's a pituitary hormone, not a thyroid hormone, right? Exactly. It's the pituitary going downstream to the thyroid and saying, hey man, kick out some more stuff for us here, right? Basically. But my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, if a doctor sees high TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, then based on that alone, they can prescribe Synthroid, levothyroxine, something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, they'll just go immediately to that without actually testing iodine. What's the T3 doing? The body her thyroid might not make that much T4 if we have enough T3.
Yeah, well, T3 is the active form. That's the one that we want circulating around, right? And T4 converts to T3.
Another one that drives me crazy is people will blame the thyroid for low T3 when the thyroid barely makes any T3. That is a liver issue.
And this is that whole, the shin bone's connected to the knee bone kind of thing, right? So the pituitary's doing its thing, the thyroid's doing its thing, the adrenals are involved as well. And then the liver, of course, is involved. Anything that you can think about that has to do with hormones on some level, the liver's involved. And so you're saying that, and this, I've been telling people this for a long time, that my take on thyroid is that the thyroid is kind of caught in the middle. And to a large degree, that's literally what's happening. We have the HPA axis where we have the hypothalamus and pituitary above the thyroid. We have the adrenals below the thyroid. You got the liver involved there as well. And oftentimes the thyroid is not the problem, but it's blamed for the problem, right? There's all these other factors that we're not paying attention to.
Yeah, it's almost always a victim.
Yeah. And then yet it's medicated like crazy. And then exactly what you said about people taking iron on a regular basis and not feeling any better, or their blood test not improving. People take levothyroxine and they don't feel any better. They don't lose the weight. They aren't any, warmer in the cold months, or all the other things that we talk about with thyroid. And yet, if you take, it's not the same as what I was saying about statins, but it's kind of the same. You're taking leva, which is synthroid, and your TSH number comes down because we're bumping up the T4. And so the body's like, well, plenty of T4. I'm going to bring my TSH down now. All is well, but you're not feeling any better, but your labs look better. And so the symptom is high TSH, at least the way that they're looking at it in the blood. But there's all these symptoms that are related that aren't improving, even though that number goes down.
Yeah. And that's actually where hair comes in really handy when we do a hair analysis. So if we're getting normal labs for thyroid, but we're still having all those thyroid symptoms, that fatigue, the brain fog, especially in the afternoon, constipation, we want to see what calcium is doing in the hair. And this can be a lot of people over supplementing vitamin D, or in a stress response, we start sequestering that calcium where it shouldn't be. If it gets too elevated, especially compared to potassium, because potassium is needed to sensitize those cells to thyroid hormone, what we get is called a calcium shell kind of forming around the cells. And we think about that thyroid hormone just kind of just bouncing off of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So calcium is another one of these things. It's very heavily supplemented in this country for a very specific reason, and that's bone density. But then in many cases, doctors aren't paying attention to all the cofactors that are required for a bone to actually become more dense. And you mentioned vitamin D3. That's become a bit of a problem in this country, much like what we talked about with zinc, because there's not necessarily an issue with supplementing vitamin D3 if things are imbalanced. But if you're not taking K2, if you're not taking magnesium, if you're not absorbing the minerals that are needed to build a stronger bone, then you've got an issue. And we still, to this day, and it just takes time for things to catch up, we still have people come in far more often to Vitality Nutrition asking for vitamin D3 than for vitamin D3 with vitamin K2. We have more people coming in looking for zinc than zinc with copper. I think it goes back to the training. Like I was saying, we have this training where we are looking for very specific things, and we're not necessarily looking to keep balance across the whole of the body. We're looking to kind of target things. Oh, I'm low in vitamin D. I'll take vitamin D. Oh, I'm worried about my immune system. I'll take zinc. My TSH is high. I'll take levothyroxine. But we're not paying attention to all of these cofactors that are critical to optimizing health. And you've shed a light on several of these right now. Now, what I don't want to do to my listeners is leave them like, oh my gosh, so I've got all these things now that I'm trying to figure out. How do I find balance? And I was leading to a question that we got off track a little bit that I want to ask you. You're generally seeing, I think, a lot of people with multiple deficiencies. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever done blood work with somebody being in optimal range on everything.
Okay. And typically deficient in 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 things. Is that accurate as well, or not necessarily?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. A lot of deficiencies. So if you see someone like that and they've got a copper thing and they've got, magnesium thing, whatever it is that you're seeing the deficiency in, are you typically recommending individual ingredients? Are you recommending like a multivitamin to get sort of the core of those things handled? How do you do that? What's your take on that?
So it's funny when we look at certain minerals, we don't bring in that specific mineral a lot of times. We're going to give adrenal support. Potassium is a great example of that. You can bring in a ton of potassium. A lot of times it's still not going to bring those levels up unless we take care of the adrenals first.
Okay. So then how are you supporting the adrenals if you're not just, because essentially what you're saying is I'm not necessarily going to dump the mineral in there because there's an underlying reason as to why the person's not
and one mineral in that area. Mineral out. So that's what the big thing we're always watching.
Okay.
So we go for that. The root cause is what we're looking for.
Well, let's take magnesium and zinc. So these are 2 really common ones you see. Are you doing things besides supplementing magnesium and zinc to support the body in those areas?
Yeah, we look at zinc. I like to do that in a multi-mineral. Let's get zinc. Let's get copper. Let's get molybdenum. If we can do them all at the same time. Those are really, really important ones. Magnesium. Yeah, we're doing magnesium by itself. One, we're going to make sure we're not taking too much vitamin D there because that will give you a magnesium deficiency as well because we use a ton of it to make it bioavailable. So that's one thing we want to watch there. We also want to watch B6 levels with magnesium. make sure those are good. And then, of course, have to be careful with B6. That's one of the unique B vitamins that we can get too much of.
Yeah. And I'm assuming you probably are using P5P when you're using B6.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is the active form essentially. And so then if someone comes in to see you, I'm curious how you do it versus, I'm sure it's different for all kinds of different practitioners out there, but they come to see you, they get the blood test. Let's say you put them on a multi-mineral and a magnesium supplement. And, maybe there's one other thing that you've got them on for adrenal support or something along those lines. Are you recommending 3 months, 6 months, a year? When are they coming back to see if what your recommendations are the recommendations you made are making an impact when it comes to the blood?
We like people to come back in a month just to see how symptoms are doing. So we're going to use symptoms before anything else.
Okay.
If we're going to do blood work, let's go at least 3 months before we run some more blood. One of the crazy things that we do here, which is getting referred to as witchcraft by some people, I think, on our table, and especially for adrenal issues, we'll actually hit certain points on the body, see how tender they are, and then set adrenal formulas next to them and see which ones their bodies are reacting to the best. It's pretty much everybody. We need to fix digestion or blood sugar regulation. I'm yet to find somebody that doesn't need one of those two things fixed.
Yeah.
Digestion, if digestion's off, there's not really a point in supplementing because you're not going to get most of it.
Yeah, you're going to lose out on a ton of it, especially the minerals, right? And so we're talking about kinesiology or muscle testing, essentially. There's different ways to do it, of course.
Yes.
But you find that the reason I asked that question is, we talked way back to the beginning about cash pay, concierge, all this kind of stuff. It can get expensive, right? Supplements can get expensive. Testing can get expensive. People want to get as much as they can with as little outlay as they need. But the thing that you're essentially recommending here is you're saying, okay, let's get a baseline with the blood test. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but I think I understand. Let's get a baseline on the blood test, see where we're at. We're going to make some recommendations based on A, what the blood test result, but also B, what your body seems to want when it comes to muscle testing and how the body is responding to specific supplements. We're going to come back a month from now and see how things are. Are we making improvement in these areas as far as your symptomology? And then, maybe 3 months later or longer, we may do more blood if there's still some symptoms that we're trying to figure out why we haven't seen improvement. Is that basically in a nutshell how you're doing it?
Yeah, and it brings up a good point too. And we were talking at the beginning of which tests we recommend for different things too. We'll work off the symptoms first and foremost every time, especially if people don't want to pay for the functional testing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we like people to try things first and then move on. And then blood's not always the best. For minerals, we do like hair better.
Okay. All right.
Do that. If it's mood issues, we're going to do urine-based testing. We're looking for metabolic byproducts that put off. And if you really want to lock in to supplement specifically for you, then we're going to do DNA testing and look at your SNPs.
Okay. All right. So you've got all those things available. Now, you're in Utah, as we've discussed. Do you do anything remotely with people that are not in your area?
I do. And we can send a lot of these tests through FullScript, and we can send all the supplements through FullScript.
Okay. All right. And do you ship products from your location as well or no?
Not yet. I've been using FullScript for that.
Okay.
It takes care of the sales tax for me. And there's 20,000 items on there.
Right. Okay. All right. So then if someone's listening to this and they're feeling like, okay, where do I start? What's your recommendation?
If they're wanting to work with us, we'd love them to set up an appointment, come in, let's just have a conversation first, and then give them our ideas of what we could try or which testing we could do. We'd really like people to set the appointment up. It's only Silka and I here. Mm-hmm. So there's only two of us. So it gets really hard when it's just me and somebody comes in for an appointment.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So how do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so they want to call us at this door here. It's 801-492-2723. Or if they just want to check us out on the website, it's sheashealth.com. And that's Shea, SHEAS, health.com.
All right. And we'll put both of those in the show description as well. So people can look on the show description. To remind everybody, we are on YouTube now. So if you're not watching us, you can. I don't know that that's necessarily a win, but if you're a YouTube person, there you go. And otherwise, of course, your favorite podcast apps are a good place to go. Shea is now carrying a pretty good chunk of Vitality Nutrition products out at his shop as well. So if you're in Utah County and it's more convenient for you to pick things up out there, you certainly can do that. He's got a great shop. He's got, there's just two of them, as he mentioned out there, but Shea and Silka are both great, really, really good on the knowledge, and certainly people that I trust sending you to get answers to some of your questions. In fact, Shea's going to be running some blood tests on me soon, and we're going to be digging into that as well. So anyway, I think that's all I've got today. Shea, is there anything you want to leave my listeners with?
No. Thanks for having me on. And like I said, yeah, we just started carrying your stuff, even though people would probably consider us competitors, but I think we're far enough away, and I love your products.
Well, and let's talk about competition for a minute. My take on it is really, really simple. Good people doing good things in this industry are needed, and they're needed in every little corner, whether it's Highland, Utah, or Bountiful, or South Ogden, where I'm at, or on the web, where you can find our stuff as well. I don't have my products in 1,000 places. I don't ever want my products in 1,000 places. They are in very strategically planned clinics and supplement stores in people where I know the owner, I know what type of individual they are, what their knowledge base is. Those are the only kind of people that I like to sell my products to. It's why they're not on Amazon, and they're not on all the, a million other places on the web. Vitality Nutrition is and always has been about taking care of you, the client, at the personal level. And I'm always happy to share in that with someone who's doing great work like you are, Shea. So that's why we are close enough that we could be considered competitors, but I'm not ever going to look at it that way. So and frankly, I think there's a good reason for people to visit you. There's a good reason for people to visit me, depending on what they're looking for anyway. So no problem as far as that goes. I really appreciate your time. I'd love to have you back on and maybe dig in deeper on a couple of very specific issues, down the road if you're up for that. And until next time, because I am going to invite you back on, thank you so much for joining me on Vitality Radio. And for everybody listening to the show, thank you for joining us as well. This show, I hope, was more about kind of dialing in on education. If you've got a set of blood tests that you're curious about some of these numbers, pull it out, when you can, when you're not driving down the road, and listen to this again with your blood tests in front of you, and take a look at your GGT and your ALP and some of these other things that Shea mentioned, and see where things are at. If it's been a while and you feel like you need an update and you're open to working with Shea based on his education here, I highly recommend him as a great resource for this type of testing, and would love to see you get that information for yourself, especially if you're dealing with some symptoms and you're trying to figure out where they're coming from. And the last thing I'll say is I agree with Shea completely that you can absolutely start at symptoms. Heck, that's what I've always done, because we don't do blood tests here at Vitality. And we've had a lot of success based on a ton of what is actually clinical research that we've studied on here, but also anecdotal evidence of just what works for people to help with these things. It's always how I've done it. There's a combination of education and experience that have helped us be very, useful in those areas for you as well. So don't feel like you've always got to have lab, but if you're chasing something that you've been trying to figure out based on symptoms and supplements and diet changes and things like that, and you're hitting brick walls, those labs can be extremely beneficial, and this different type of testing can be beneficial as well. All right. I probably talked too much, but thank you so much for joining me. If you have any questions, call us. 801-292-6662 is the number. You can visit us in Bountiful. You can visit us now in South Ogden, or of course you can visit us online at vitalitynutrition.com. Thank you so much for listening to me. My name is Jared St. Clair, and this has been Vitality Radio. Thanks for listening to the Vitality Radio podcast. If this episode helped you, follow the show, share it with someone, and explore trusted education and resources at vitalitynutrition.com. See you next time.
Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Vitality Radio. Just a reminder that this podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast has not been evaluated by the FDA. This podcast is provided with the understanding that the information shared is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. This podcast is not a substitute for professional care by a medical professional. Thank you.